If you look closely at people in really high-stress situations, right, like whether they're waiting to give a massive public presentation or maybe they're just sitting in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs in a hospital waiting room, they're almost always doing something with their hand.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, tapping a foot against the floor or clicking a ballpoint pen repeatedly or even just rubbing a smooth stone in their pocket. Human beings have this really instinctual, almost biological need for a tactile anchor when the internal mind feels chaotic.
Right, exactly.
Hmm.
But what if you took that basic human instinct, that kind of frantic need to touch something, to ground yourself in reality, and you engineered it over centuries? What if you combined it with, like, dense theological symbolism and carefully timed breathing and a perfectly sequenced mental journey?
You'd end up with a pretty powerful tool.
You would. You might just create the ultimate tool to hack human anxiety and force mental focus. So for you, the learner tuning in today, we have a massive stack of sources for our deep dive.
Right.
We're looking at ancient theological texts, historical articles, and even some modern cognitive psychology research. We are going to explore a universally recognized, but honestly, often profoundly misunderstood object, the Rosary.
Yeah, and to truly understand this object, we really have to strip away our preconceptions of it as just jewelry or even strictly as a religious artifact. From a psychological standpoint, our sources challenge us to examine it as a highly sophisticated cybernetic control system.
A cybernetic control system, wow.
All right. It's a behavioral mechanism that actively regulates human emotion, goal states, and our connection to society.
Okay, let's unpack this because we are going on a fascinating journey today. We're starting with the physical beads, the knots, the hidden history, and we're taking that all the way down into the neurological frameworks that explain how a simple string of beads actually alters human brain chemistry. And the Catholic Rosary, of course, does not exist in a cultural vacuum.
No, not at all. The utilization of prayer beads is a truly global phenomenon. If you look at the Islamic faith, for example, practitioners utilize prayer beads known as the tasbih or misbah,
Right.
and those typically feature 99 beads or sometimes 33, which are structured to correspond to the 99 names of Allah. It serves as this really beautiful physical method for keeping count during recitations without needing to, consciously track the numbers in your head.
Yeah, and the standard Catholic Rosary, by contrast, has 59 beads.
Yeah.
But tracking down where the physical counting tool actually originated in the Christian tradition takes us, well, far away from modern churches and directly into the wilderness. Our sources point us to the early Christian desert fathers.
Right. These were hermits and monks living in extreme isolation in the Egyptian desert. And they were tasked with reciting the 150 Psalms from the Bible every day.
Which is a lot to remember.
Exactly. In that harsh environment, without modern tools, they needed a foolproof way to keep track of their progress. So they turned to knotted ropes. Tying a knot for each prayer provided a purely practical, tactile solution to a fundamental memory problem.
So it starts off resembling, like, an ancient abacus, just a piece of survival gear for monks to track their daily labor.
Fast forward to the year 1208, and the narrative takes a pivotal turn. Catholic tradition asserts this is the year the Blessed Virgin Mary supposedly appeared to St. Dominic de Guzman, presenting him with the Rosary in its more structured, recognizable form.
The famous Marian apparition.
Exactly. Though, as an impartial note based on the historical documentation in our sources, it is worth mentioning that this specific account of Mary giving the Rosary to St. Dominic doesn't actually appear in any primary documents from the Catholic Church or his own order of preachers from that specific era.
Oh,
Yeah, that tradition was actually documented by a Dominican named Alanis de Rupe roughly 250 years later. But regardless of the exact historical origin, the Dominican order was totally instrumental in developing and codifying the specific prayer format across Europe.
wait, hold on. I have to challenge this framing a bit. If the ultimate goal is just counting to a specific number, I mean, my fingers work perfectly well. A random piece of twine works perfectly well. Why do we need the ornate physical object today? Like, why didn't the tradition just remain a crude knotted rope? The physical form must matter beyond simple arithmetic.
Oh, it absolutely does. The physical form had to adapt because, well, in certain eras, the object itself became a tool for sheer survival. The design of a rosary carries the heavy weight of history, specifically when religious expression was driven underground.
Like when?
The Irish penal rosaries from the 16th and 17th centuries provide a pretty stark example of this evolution.
Ah, right, the penal laws in Ireland, those severely restricted or, well, outright banned Catholic Mass and the open practice of the faith. To be caught practicing was incredibly dangerous.
Which meant a massive traditional string of 59 beads worn around the neck was a huge liability. So the physical object evolved into a small, single-decade ring. Just 10 beads on a tiny loop with a crucifix.
Wow.
It was designed to be easily concealed right in the palm of the hand or slipped into a pocket just to evade anti-Catholic persecution by the authorities.
And the ingenuity goes even further, right? Because they carve secret codes into the crucifixes themselves. Like a British soldier might inspect it and just see a crude trinket, but to the person holding it, those carvings were a dense theological map.
Yes, precisely.
They carved a hammer into the wood to signify the nails of the crucifixion. They carved a rooster to symbolize the biblical story of Peter's denial of Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, they densely packed an entire worldview into an object small enough to hide in a closed fist. It provided immense psychological resilience to a persecuted group.
And what's fascinating here is how the physical geometry of the modern rosary reinforces that exact same concept of a map. Think about the overarching shape. The primary portion of the rosary is a closed circle. Psychologically and theologically, the circle represents eternity, unending prayer, and divine perfection. It has no discernible beginning and no end.
Let's geek out on the numerology of the 59 beads on that modern structure for a second, because none of it's random. The rosary consists of 53 Hail Mary beads. Those 53 beads symbolize the 53 days between Easter Sunday and Pentecost.
Right.
Then you have the 6 Our Father beads, the larger beads that separate the groups of 10. Those 6 beads represent the 6 distinct roles of God described in Scripture. Creator, provider, protector, redeemer, judge, and loving Father.
Which is incredibly structured.
Yeah. And add them together, 5 plus 9, and you get 14, representing the 14 stations of the cross.
Then consider the drop-down portion that hangs off that circular chain. Right where that straight drop connects to the circle sits the centerpiece medallion. And that medallion functions as way more than a physical connector keeping the jewelry intact.
What does it do?
It symbolically represents the incarnation. It marks the exact conceptual point where the circular, eternal heaven physically meets the straight, linear drop down to the earthly crucifix.
That is wild. The physical object is doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting before a single word is ever even spoken. But, I mean, the physical beads are ultimately just waypoints. The beads exist to guide the words.
And the words only exist to guide the mind.
Exactly. And the core building block of this entire system is the Hail Mary prayer. Its roots are intensely biblical, pulling directly from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1. It fuses the greeting of the angel Gabriel with the greeting of Elizabeth. But a detail from Pope John Paul II completely recontextualizes how this prayer actually functions.
Yes, the concept of the hinge.
Right. Pope John Paul II noted that the name Jesus serves as the literal hinge of the Hail Mary. It is the absolute center of gravity. Like the first half of the prayer is praise, the second half is petition. But right in the dead center, acting as the fulcrum, is the name Jesus. Even though it's universally known as a Marian prayer, focused on Mary, its architecture makes it Christocentric.
It acts as the pivot point for the practitioner's attention.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources from the Rosary Center dive into how a practitioner is actually supposed to engage with these words. They explicitly state that the vocal prayers, like the physical moving of the lips to say the Hail Marys and Our Fathers over and over, are merely the body of the Rosary. The mental meditation is the soul.
We see the mechanics of the rosary functioning at a very high level here. The practitioner is not supposed to dedicate all their intellectual bandwidth to the repetitive words of the Hail Mary. The 10 Hail Marys in a decade act purely as a measuring device.
Like a timer.
Exactly. They function as an hourglass made of words.
Okay, let me stop you there. Because anyone who has ever tried to repeat a mantra or a prayer knows the exact opposite usually happens. If I say the exact same sentence 50 times, my brain immediately wanders. I start thinking about my grocery list or whether I left the oven on or some embarrassing thing I said at a party 5 years ago.
Sure, yeah.
Repetition usually breeds boredom, not intense focus. So how does this system prevent you from just spacing out?
Well, that's the trap of looking at the exercise purely as a vocal repetition. The timer aspect is crucial. You use the time duration, the few minutes it takes to recite those 10 Hail Marys, to mentally visualize the mystery.
Ah, the mystery.
Right. These are highly specific, dramatic scenes from the life of Christ and Mary. The tradition categorizes them into the joyful, the sorrowful, and the glorious mysteries. And later, Pope John Paul II, drawing on the theology of a Maltese saint named George Prica, added the luminous mysteries.
So while your mouth and your fingers are on autopilot, pacing out the rhythm, Your active imagination is supposed to be visualizing Jesus agonizing in the Garden of Gethsemane, or the profound silence of the Nativity.
Exactly. Reciting all 20 mysteries acts as what popes have called a compendium of the gospel. It mirrors the entire liturgical year of the Church. You are basically walking through the entirety of the New Testament narrative in your mind's eye, while your voice and your tactile senses keep the beat.
Which brings us to a really critical intersection. Why does this alleviate modern stress? Like, why does pacing through a 2,000-year-old story while holding beads actually make people feel better today? To understand how an ancient theology tackles modern anxiety, our sources pivot directly into cognitive psychology.
Yeah, to explain the underlying mechanism, we look at a really fascinating framework published in the Personality and Social Psychology Review. They argue that rituals function as a cybernetic control system.
That phrase sounds incredibly intimidating. Cybernetic control system?
I know, but think of it exactly like the thermostat in your hallway. A thermostat constantly monitors the ambient temperature. If a window blows open and the house gets too cold, that creates a deficit. The thermostat detects the deficit and triggers the furnace to turn on. The furnace runs until the ideal, comfortable state is restored, and then it shuts off.
Makes sense.
Rituals function in the exact same manner for human psychology. They actively regulate our emotion, our goal states, and our social connections.
So when we experience a severe emotional deficit, like a sudden spike in anxiety, a terrifying medical diagnosis, or just that overwhelming feeling of losing control over our lives, it triggers an instinctual need to perform a ritual to restore our internal equilibrium.
Precisely. The psychological intervention happening during the Rosary relies heavily on what is called bottom-up processing.
Bottom-up processing.
Yeah, the physical, sensory actions of the ritual, the rigidity, the formality, the tactile repetition, they demand focus from the nervous system. As you move your fingers from one beat to the next, your brain engages in a process called event segmentation.
Break that down for us. What is event segmentation?
Well, when you are highly anxious, time tends to blur into a singular, overwhelming sense of dread. Event segmentation forces the brain to break time down into tiny, manageable physical units.
I see.
You touch one bead, that is a distinct event. You move to the next bead, that is a new event. You are forcing your sensory processing to anchor to the present micro-moment.
Oh, wow. So by demanding that level of motor and cognitive control, feeling the bead, pacing the breath, keeping the count,
Yeah,
the ritual does something incredible. It swamps the working memory.
exactly.
Our brains literally only have so much processing bandwidth. If you fill that bandwidth with counting physical beads, reciting rhythmic words, and visualizing rich historical scenes, the system hits full capacity. There's simply no room left over for the anxiety to process. It literally blocks out intrusive, panicky thoughts because the mental inbox is full.
It's true. The ritual acts as a highly structured cognitive distraction technique, and we have concrete experimental proof of this phenomenon in the source material.
A college study.
Yeah, researchers took Catholic college students and deliberately induced a high-stress state. Once the students' physiological anxiety markers were elevated, they randomly assigned them to either passively watch a religious video or actively recite the Rosary.
And I would imagine passive watching leaves way too much bandwidth open.
The data confirms that completely. The students who recited the Rosary experienced a significantly greater reduction in physiological anxiety. Their heart rates and nervous systems literally calmed down more effectively than those who just passively absorbed the video. The physical, repetitive action combined with the mental focus actively downregulated their biology.
But bottom-up processing, the swamping of the working memory, is ultimately just distraction, right? Distraction is a band-aid. It doesn't permanently cure the underlying feeling of helplessness or chaos.
That's a great point. Distraction is only half the equation. While bottom-up processing stops the panic attack in the moment, it is the top-down processing that actually restores the emotional deficit.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture, walk us through how top-down processing operates here.
Top-down processing is entirely about the overarching meaning you attach to the physical action.
Okay.
The Rosary is not an arbitrary fidget spinner. It carries immense, centuries-old symbolic weight. It connects the user to the incarnation, to generations of ancestors, to the fiat, the definitive yes of Mary. When a practitioner successfully completes this deeply meaningful, structured sequence, it transfers a sense of agentic control back to them.
We need a solid analogy for agentic control.
Yeah.
Is that, like, When your work inbox has 3,000 unread emails
Mm.
and you feel entirely helpless and paralyzed,
Hmm.
you can't instantly answer the emails, so instead you take 15 minutes to meticulously organize the physical folders on your desk. You haven't solved the massive problem, but you've executed a structured, successful action that makes you feel like you are back in the driver's seat of your own life.
That is a perfect modern equivalent. It restores your agency. It signals to your nervous system that you are capable of executing a plan. But with the Rosary, it goes a step further. It signals to the user that they belong to something much larger, much older, and far more stable than their current fleeting anxiety. You are tapping into an ancient rhythm.
Which brings up the social regulation aspect of this cybernetic control system. Even if a person is sitting alone in their living room at midnight praying the rosary, that top-down meaning ties them to a massive global social group. They're executing the exact same behavior millions of others are executing.
Absolutely.
But the sources highlight what happens when this ritual is performed together, physically, in massive numbers.
Group participation scales the psychological effects exponentially, creating what sociologist Emil Durkheim called collective effervescence.
The scale of this in the modern world is staggering. Our sources detail a specific movement in Brazil known as the Terço dos Homens, or the Men's Rosary. We aren't talking about a small prayer group in a church basement. We are talking about 2 million participants. 2 million men gathering weekly to pray these mysteries together.
And when you have group rituals involving synchronous movement at that scale, the physiological impacts are profound.
Yeah.
Everyone is reciting the identical words at the identical tempo. They are moving their beads at the exact same moment. This behavioral synchrony physically generates deep perceptions of emotional synchrony.
It's the same psychological mechanism that explains why militaries march in tight formation, or why crowds sing in unison at a concert. When human beings move in time together, breathing at the same pace, speaking at the same pitch, it bypasses logic and automatically generates trust. Your brain perceives the shared movement and concludes, we are moving as one organism, therefore we are loyal to one another.
Exactly. It advertises group loyalty, it builds intrinsic trust, and it allows individuals to affiliate deeply with their community. The shared attention on the tactile ritual physically aligns the emotional states of everyone participating, curing the social deficit the exact same way it cures the individual anxiety deficit.
So what does this all mean? We have covered vast territory today.
Huh?
We started with ancient monks in the brutal isolation of the desert, tying simple knots in a rope just to anchor their minds to their daily psalm.
We did.
We examined the persecuted Catholics in Ireland, gripping a single-decade ring in their palms, relying on secret carvings of hammers and roosters to maintain their psychological resilience under the threat of death. And we broke down the exact neurological mechanism, the cybernetic control system of how structured, repetitive action swamps our working memory to defeat panic, restore our agency, and bind millions of people together in collective effervescence.
Yeah, we've seen that analyzing the rosary solely as a religious artifact really misses the profound genius of its design. It is a highly sophisticated, historically refined cognitive tool.
Whether you are holding a Catholic rosary, an Islamic tasbih, or frankly, if you simply rely on a highly structured, tactile morning routine to ground yourself before a chaotic workday, human beings are hardwired to require physical anchors. We desperately need a tangible way to process abstract dread. We need the movement of the physical body to discipline the abstract mind.
This raises an important question as we look at how these ancient tools intersect with our current trajectory. Our sources highlight a fascinating recent development released by the Vatican. It is called the Rosary.
The rosary.
Yeah, it's a $109 wearable smart bracelet. It features 10 black agate and hematite beads, but it incorporates a metal cross embedded with a movement-detecting accelerometer and Bluetooth technology.
A wearable tech rosary. Incredible.
It connects to a mobile app on your smartphone. You physically activate the device by making the sign of the cross. The app tracks your progression through the beads, provides audio explanations, and visually guides you through the mysteries of the day.
It is attempting to marry an 800-year-old tactile tradition with modern digital architecture. And I think that leaves you, our listener, with a profound thought to explore on your own today. As our modern world becomes increasingly digital, increasingly formless, and frankly, increasingly anxiety-inducing, how will our biology react? When the endless scrolling and the formless data get to be too much for our working memory to handle? Will we find ourselves instinctively returning to ancient tactile rituals? Will we reach for something solid, like a simple string of beads, just to remember how to focus?
It certainly suggests that the biological need for a physical anchor is one mechanism that technology has not, and perhaps cannot, evolve us past.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope you walk away today equipped to notice the hidden rituals and the physical anchors operating in your own daily life. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.